Okay, it's a couple minutes after 6. We're going to get the Finance Committee started. All Finance Committee members are here. This is a finance meeting, discussion of the operating budget 2021-25 and capital budget 2021-26. Go ahead, Director Miller, if you want to go ahead and get started with the presentation. I guess you go over revenue first and then various expenditures.
Yep. I thought I'd first talk about why we have to do all of this. And it's because the Ohio Revised Code doesn't allow the city to spend any money unless it's been appropriated. So council has to appropriate the money before we can spend anything. And we cannot appropriate money, we cannot appropriate more than what we have. So whatever our cash balance is at the beginning of the year plus what we think we'll spend. So that is basically what this whole document is doing, of the balance that we're trying to create when we do the budget. I thought that would be something we should review. Then, so we'll start with revenue. And if you have your budget book, that is the first tab. This is the general fund revenue, and there's a pie chart on your desk and up on the screen.
I'm sorry, is this another budget book?
Yeah.
I don't have one either, so thanks.
I think no, that last year. I'm sorry.
Good.
Okay, so for 2022, the general fund estimated revenue is $17,969,435. This is a slight increase over 2021. The majority of the increase relates to taxes. Income taxes, we've discussed over and over for a year and a half. We're anticipating they go down. So we started with the $17.4 million that we expect to collect in 2021, and we did reductions for work from home. Then we added back some increases that we were expecting just from pay increases, and then we know that we'll get some money from residents working from home that in the past may have been working in Columbus or in another community. And in the end, we got to a gross income tax of $15.5 million. Now, 5% of that comes off and goes to Fund 350. Then we also take off $3 million that is property taxes and hotel taxes than last year. But just so you know, that number is reflecting some reduction, significant reduction in income taxes.
Sorry, Director Miller, do you have an extra one that we could give to Michelle? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you can look through it and then just give it back to me if you don't want a second copy. So the other components of revenue are hotel taxes, which we've talked about, intergovernmental. So this is local government fund from the county. This includes our JED-Z. Some of that falls in the intergovernmental category. We have charges for services, which is Parks and Rec, that type of thing. Fines, licenses, and permits, which are a lot of building department collections. Other sources, which are refunds, interest, and then the property tax you can see is part of that bigger tax piece. Does anybody have questions about the revenue for the general fund?
Is this about where you plan it to be based on all your projections?
Yes. I mean, a couple years ago, we were hoping it would have been higher at this point, but because of the pandemic, I think this is a good estimate that we feel comfortable with. The biggest piece that we were concerned about, of course, was the income tax. And I had done a calculation, and the income tax administrators had done an independent calculation, and we came together and we were about the same. So I feel comfortable that we're not being unreasonable. Now, it could be much, you know, if We don't know exactly what's gonna happen. It could end up being much better or much worse, but I think this is a very reasonable estimate.
Okay, thank you.
So,
then-
if I can interrupt real quick, so
Yeah.
you think the revenue will be down because of the, income taxes with people working from home? Do you think, what do you think would be made up with, you know, Grandview residents working from home?
It is so hard to tell. We put, several $100,000 in there as a bump up. We're hoping, we've actually just met with the administration, and we're gonna do some communications just to get out there to residents, to remind them to ask your employer to withhold for Grandview when you're working from home. The mayor has done an article about it, and so we're just gonna try to put that information out there to residents so we can capture as much as we can.
If I may, this week, they should run it, well, I believe they'll run it the first week of December, in just my monthly column. So you would obviously be free to share that so that people know what they're supposed to do and so that the city can capture what is due in their taxes.
Thank you. When that comes out, can you share that with council, please? Or can you share it out for council?
Yeah, we plan to do, I mean, not a campaign, but almost a campaign of social media through, you know, December through tax season. We might, I think we're gonna do a postcard, just because it's not something that a lot of people think about, but I think it's an opportunity for us.
Yeah, that's great.
Is the 1.9 million anticipated reduction, that's based upon kind of trends that we're seeing this year?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we've gone through and looked at, you know, some of the employers that have declines, and then we did, you know, an additional reduction, and that's how we got it, you know, to where we were, without being like too extreme and too conservative, just being reasonable.
Thank you.
So tab 2 is, Leilani, you can go ahead. Tab 2 is the general fund appropriations, and this is basically what we call the operating budget. Most of the city's activity runs through the general fund. The pie chart up on the screen, and we'll probably add these pie charts next year to the budget book, because they kind of give you a nice, it shows you by department on the pie chart how the money is spread out and how it's spent. And if you go to the next pie chart, it shows you by category. So you can see 70% of our general fund budget is used for salary and related items. So a lot of the budget is already done before we even get to, you know, going through line by line for the departments. So if you remember, the revenue for the general fund was $17,969,000. The expenses are $17,909,000. So we are planning to spend less than we're bringing in. We like to do that with the general fund. We're not required. We could spend more than we bring in because we have a fund balance, but we try to keep it within, basically living within our means. And that, as far as the general fund budget, we highlight the changes by department that are significant. There isn't a lot that's changed from last year. We added a technology position. I think we're gonna call it a technology specialist. Right now, Brian is reviewing all the resumes and applications for that. So that cost all in, we're anticipating to be $109,000. So that's an increase from last year.
Can you explain what that position is, and 109, that's including like benefits and everything, correct?
That is the all-in cost for salary plus benefits, which includes health insurance, retirement, Medicare, all of that. And the position is going to serve as an assistant to Brian. The person will likely be doing a lot of help desk type items to allow Brian to focus on infrastructure and server and high-level stuff. And this will be a person that employees can go to day to day to get help with items, and then serve as a backup for Brian.
I remember, did we already approve that?
Yes, well, council approved it and discussed it. We didn't budget any money for it yet. And he's just now getting into the process of hiring, so he's not anticipating that anybody's gonna be here until the beginning of the year. But yes, this is that same position that we talked about.
If we don't appropriate it, right? So
Pardon?
They can't be if we don't appropriate it, right?
Correct.
So,
Right.
And that's a full-time position, correct?
Correct. Another change is we're increasing income tax refunds in anticipation of some people who may have had their employer withhold for Grandview Heights, but they're allowed to ask for a refund because they worked from home. So we increased total tax refunds from $340,000 to $400,000. And I guess we'll just wait and see how it actually falls out when we get to that point. Now, because we have lower income tax collections, we can reduce our collection fees, which are a 3% fee to Rita. So that increased refunds, decreased collection fees, we net out to only about a $12,000 increase to the budget. Some other increases of note, in the sanitation department, we're increasing contractual services by $15,000 for additional recycling fees, and we're now going to be, the city is going to be funding the food waste collection fee. Last year, or 2021, we had a grant with SWACO, and we split that cost with Go Zero and the grant. No grant for 2022, but the administration has seen the interest in the community to continue that, so we had to increase our costs for that.
Just to clarify, you're talking about the recycle, or the compost bins down here at the service center?
Correct. Correct.
Also,
Are you on page 12 right now? You're just kind of scrolling
I'm
on
just kind
the
of
order,
going
right?
through,
Okay.
yeah, I'm
Just
saying
making
the
sure I'm here.
highlights.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, just to add on the food waste, we doubled our capacity midway through the year because it was so successful. So 10 or 12,000 is a, 12 or 15 is a reasonable.
Right.
There's very good utilization of it, and it will be successful, we believe, in the future.
And on a related note,
Have you seen any reduction in our regular waste disposal fees with SWACO in relation to?
we have. We've actually seen the landfill fees go down. I'm sure it's partially because of this. We've also seen recycling go up. So it's all kind of netting out, but I think it's good that it's going away from landfill and into these other buckets.
It's hard to measure too, because remember the work from home started a lot of people generating waste at home. So it's really kind of hard to determine cause and effect, but general trends are very good.
Thank you.
The other item on page 12 is the contractual services for OOPS tickets. So anytime anybody digs, the city pays a company to go out and make sure that there's no utilities under there. We've had, this year has been especially high, and we anticipate that's gonna continue, which is indicating lots of construction projects, lots of people doing work.
I love that name. That's just fun.
Then on page 14 is the Parks and Rec Department. This department has had some additional positions, trying to get the right lineup for running all the programs and keeping the parks maintained. So there are some additional costs this year for the Parks Department for those items.
Can you speak to the recreation supervisor role, what that will be?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I believe I mentioned this in the budget, but I'll go over the whole thing again. Generally speaking, I would say every department, not just parks, not just rec, not just service, really needs more depth. You know, we're of a size where many times the department head is handling minutia because there is just no one to delegate to. Then you have absences, vacations, general burnout, and 24-hour operation. So strategically speaking, Parks and Rec is an area that's really split into two functionally, but they're related and complementary. Parks Department, which is maintenance and planning parks, executing those projects, stewarding those, as well as the tree program. And then, of course, the Rec Department. The vision is to add a layer of management, essentially. So you would have the director, then you'd have a superintendent of parks and a superintendent of recreation, and then you would have people to delegate to under that. To some degree, that already exists, but there's really just not enough depth in the rec side particularly, well, either side really, because we've added some maintenance workers too, in order to get, to meet all the needs and really have it be where we want it to be. Also allows for career and professional development, very important in terms of retaining, recruiting, and retention, to give people a path and have them kind of, shine and develop as professionals. There's one other issue I wanted to speak to with that, but it's, events. It also allows us to, we do a lot of events. They're really a heavy lift in a town like this, but it's part of our culture and we really enjoy them. And, people expect them. And it heavily falls on Parks and Rec. It generally involves every department. But that is I don't want to say it's a full-time job, but that's a very large part of the rec job in terms of the managerial aspect. So that's the reason.
Helpful, thank you.
Do you have a football contract, is that expected to be about the same, is it with the same company?
We locked into the same cost generally. We had if you recall, 2020 was to be our first year with the pool company. Swim Safe. It ended up being 2021 because of the pandemic. We kept the contract essentially terms as it was before, and that contract allowed us to lock in for a second year if we gave them, if we had a good season, we gave them notice by a certain time. So, yes.
Thank you.
And generally, I forgot to mention, the pay increases are typically based on our union contracts, which are both have 3% increases baked in. We try to do about the same for the non-union employees, giving some department heads opportunities if somebody's doing extra great or needs their wage adjusted, they do a little bit of that. And the other thing is health insurance increased 7% this year, which sounds a little bit high, I don't know, not really in the world of health insurance, but this was our first increase in 3 years. So that's pretty amazing. Franklin County has done a great job of controlling the costs and being sensitive to the employees and how much the premiums are. So we do have a 7% increase that is included in the budget.
Sorry. Someone else have questions? I'm sorry, I have so many questions. The Sidewalks Program, tree program, is that pretty steady from years past, the sidewalk replacement?
Yes, I believe it's the same as last year.
On the Sidewalks Program, I said, there's a revenue source for that, is that right?
So
In
there's
addition to the cost that comes from this expense to the city?
There's 2 different sidewalk projects.
Okay.
The one on this page is relating to tree damage. So along the tree lawn, if a tree root is popping up the sidewalk, we try to come in and take care of it because it's a city tree. And then there's the other sidewalk program, which relates to residential sidewalks. And a couple of years ago, the city did a program where we were able to get favorable pricing. So we went out and notified people and let them know. So they will pay us, I forget what it was last year, $50 a square? No, $250. So we do collect some of that money back on the street program or the sidewalk program that's done separate from the trees.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. And I believe the reasoning behind that was we want to encourage people not to cut trees down, but to have them and save them and make sure that they grow old, but also recognize that they can cause some issues in regards to damage to residential sidewalks, correct?
Right.
Thank you.
The third tab is the outside funds. So a lot of these funds have small revenue sources. There's a few that we're gonna highlight here that have more significant operations. The first one is the street fund. We pay some minor repair expenses out of this, but this is primarily where we pay for the annual street program. This year we moved the sidewalk program into this fund. We're hoping to find a way to coordinate with the street program to do it all at the same time, capture the best billing opportunity and contract price, and it kind of makes sense to just include it with the service department. So we've moved that into here. And then we also have some Fairview Avenue engineering, the first phase of that. The street fund is funded by gas tax, and we transfer money in from the general fund that relates to, it's 1 mil of our property tax levy. So between those two, we have $717,000 of revenue available, and we're able to do a $500,000 street program this year, which is less than desired by the administration, but in order to, because of the way the budget looks this year, we tried to keep it low just until we can see what's happening with
Can you
income tax.
explain moving the sidewalks into this? Is it more just aligning buckets, or does it provide any benefit by moving it into this area?
It doesn't provide any benefit.
And you're talking about the Parks and Rec program, right?
This is the regular residential sidewalk program.
Okay.
So the goal would be to have it all administered, maybe, hopefully, the construction part of it administered by the service department, and hopefully coordinate it with the actual street works.
I mean, essentially.
It's operational administrative, not cost, most likely.
Right.
You know, asphalt contractors and concrete contractors are different, but you end up doing some ramps with the street sometimes. And from my perspective, it in the past, you know, was essentially administered through 3 different departments. And that was not really, you know, where we wanted to go, so we're trying to get there where it's at least between street tree program, sidewalk program, and then the one that goes with streets, with the service program.
So it's purely administrative, but it would be beneficial.
Yes.
Thank you for explaining that, Mayor and Director Miller.
The next one, I was going, Councilmember Edelson was, do we cover the difference between the revenue and the expenses with the general fund money? And I will explain, the Tax Abatement Fund, we move income tax dollars in there. So when we have to pay tax incentives, the money is already out there. Right now, there's 4.8 million in there. We're anticipating we're gonna spend 2.8 next year, so we reduce the amount we're moving in there. The amount we move in is based on estimates of net profits. Sometimes businesses move out and we never pay them out, so that fund has kind of built itself up, and we don't want to continue to put too much money in there if we anticipate spending $2.8 million next year. So no, it's not going to require any transfer from the general fund.
Okay. Just to clarify, thank you for running through this, by the way. Is that part of the 3 million that's coming out?
Expense each year. And so we started like looking ahead and preparing and just moving those income tax dollars that we were going to start using right away. So it just kind of never really sits in the general fund at all. It's out here waiting to be paid out.
Thank you.
Then the next one is on page 23, the yard tip fund. This fund gets the other piece of that $3 million. It gets income taxes that are to be used for the debt, and it also gets pilots. The pilots are based on property values, so the property values I'm anticipating increasing by 10% next year. So the tip value will be $365 million. And these are the pilots that are distributed to the school district and also to the TIF bonds. And then on page 24, the JEDZ CETA fund. So we have a joint economic development zone with Clinton Township. We collect income taxes. 80% goes to the township. It passes through this fund. The remaining 20% is recorded in the general fund as intergovernmental. And then the city also gets a 2% administrative fee, which is $68,000. It's also in the general fund. So basically this fund is just in and out of that agreement with the township.
Just so I'm clear, on the JEDZ, I know it's variable from year to year, but what did we take in through the JEDZ in 21, and then kind of what would we anticipate?
We're anticipating 3.4 million of gross tax receipts for the JEDZ. At one point, it was as high as 3.6 million. then it's kind of gone down, and we've come back up a little bit, and we're at about 3.4 million right now.
That's 100% of what comes in, and we're collecting 20% of that.
Right, we get to keep 20, which is about $640,000
Yeah, okay, thank you.
each year. So that's a very profitable relationship.
And what's projected next year then? Did you say?
3.4. We
Okay.
typically don't project increases. They have some vacant businesses, and we're hopeful that with all of the development at Ohio State, we're gonna get some additional development, at least in the Lenox area. And then they have some other things going on the west side, or the east side of the township as well, because it's kind of pieced all over. It's a very strange.
And again, it's gone down the past couple of years.
It went down in 19 and 20, but we're now seeing it coming back up. So there's, a number of things. The Martha Moore House building is in the JEDZ. So if something happens, and I know some doctor's offices moved out of the JEDZ, so then it went down, but then they backfilled the space, so then it goes back up. So it is a little more volatile than some of the places we have.
If I may, it also has some different threats and opportunities than we're really used to seeing. One is annexation. I think we actually learned that the JEDZ wouldn't survive an annexation with Columbus. So we're really, it's something we're trying to get our head around, and we don't really control it very much. But we certainly, it's been a good partnership.
The next fund I thought we would look at on page 25 is the Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. This is the ARPA money. So council does not have to appropriate it because it's a grant. You accepted the grant, that is considered the appropriation. But we did want to continue to put out there what we'd like to do with the money. And as we were going through the budget process and items would come up, we would think, would this be a good use for the ARPA, and what is the plan, and do some development and improvements to the city going forward. So in our spending plan, you can see the two items that have already been discussed with council: information technology infrastructure and an economic development strategic plan. So Brian's working on the infrastructure. So far, we've spent about 10 grand. The strategic plan, we just entered into a contract with the group. So we'll be using part of it, about $79,000 with them. And then we also may do some additional consulting with some legal to help support that process. The other items that we would like to use: community interface software, improve our web page, and other consulting that might come up. Once the economic development strategic plan is done, we'll need to implement it. So we were thinking we could use some of the ARPA dollars for that. Commercial district area planning, which probably will be part of the implementation of the strategic plan. And then First and Grandview streetscape improvements are another item we're anticipating will come out of that plan.
Director Miller, what are pop-up studies? I'm not familiar with that.
Those are items that come up if a business owner comes to the administration and says, I would like to do this, or is there a way you can help me with this? This gives, it's usually small projects. It might be a little bit of landscaping, like at the corner of First and Grandview where we did the pots and some of that stuff. I'm anticipating it would be small things like that, where our general fund budget is just so tight, we don't include a lot of that in there. Hopefully in the future, as our income tax is coming back up, we can do that. But for now, we thought it would be a good use of these funds.
Okay.
Would that also include potentially some income tax incentives?
I don't know. Well, I think that's what's probably gonna come out of the strategic plan.
Or, okay.
Items like that. I don't know that we wanna start any programs out of this money just because it is a limited use, but, it's hard to tell.
And the community interface software, is that like the online ticket kind of thing?
That's 311. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
311. We've already actually budgeted for that, and that's in process. That's more service related. The community interface software would be something that is, I think in this case, we're talking about it in relation to econ dev planning, but also future area planning. People don't just come to public meetings to give us input. In fact, it's really hard to get them to do that when you're doing a project. So, you know, we need a structure to manage outreach and input that's project-based for these types of community projects. Econ dev, area planning, that sort of thing.
So virtual public input for various planning that goes on.
Yes, it would be more project-driven and kind of planning-driven than it would kind of service, fix this pothole type things. Make a distinction there.
And we've looked at a couple things, and they aren't very expensive. They're, you know, so much of it is web-based anymore, that the fees aren't ridiculous. And it has a lot of very creative, it's very graphic, and allows people to kind of click in and do easy feedback, unlike what maybe our website would have the capability of doing, or just a normal survey.
It would kind of help us scale that up, like, we're not going to build a brand new website for just a project. No one really, you know, we don't have the capacity to do that. These aren't big enough projects, like that would make sense, so it allows us to scale up that function.
Thank you.
That's really cool.
The next fund that I thought would be of interest is the general improvement fund, which is $350, that starts on page 25. And then you can see really the list of capital requests. So this is kind of going over to the capital ordinance. We've just laid out all the capital requests by department. I'll kind of go through some of those. 1515 Goodale remodeling and furnishings. This is to do some remodeling to this building to allow people in my building, when it's torn down, to move into here maybe. So we think that we can maybe rework the office area so we can fit finance and Parks and Rec offices in here and still leave this room the way it is. So that's what that is for. The next line is land and building projects. This used to be in the general fund. We tried to move all of the capital stuff out of the general fund and put it in the capital fund. So this is a general amount of money that has always been in the budget that allows us to do things like replace the AC at City Hall, or big projects that come up that we have to address.
So for that, there have been some major issues at the current administration building. Are those all covered, or do we need to allocate more money for the aging infrastructure up the hill, or recount them?
Yeah.
We had roof problems, and we fixed that, and it took 3 tries to fix that in the last 8, because it kept raining again, and more were identified. Multiple plumbing problems, electrical problems, including going back to the main box, the air conditioning unit. Yeah, we've got our.
Don't forget sanitary.
Yes.
Sanitary was nasty. So, but we think they're good to go, we don't need to allocate.
Well, I think it, like I said, the dollar value, I believe, we took down this year, thinking that we got big, you know. It's an old building, it's not been, anything could happen at any time. This is
And we really hate to invest more than that.
Right. That's been fixed too.
It has been fixed, so that's good to go.
So far.
Okay.
The next line is First Avenue Park at Fairview. This is the initial work that'll probably start at the end of next year that we've talked about in multiple meetings. This is just the appropriation of that first chunk of money. And then there will be another bit in next year's budget to finish out that project. I think another 100 and some thousand will be done, but this is just to get it started at the end of 2022.
What does this cover?
I'm not even sure. I'm thinking engineering and initial planning.
Okay, and then the rest would be what?
It's
Siding,
gonna be
irrigation?
turning, it'll be like excavation to take out the parking lot and put in lawn, probably some landscaping and
I
trees.
think minimal landscaping and benches, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
The fire department is requesting SCBA's, which is their breathing apparatus. They need 3 units. They need 4 sets of turnout gear, so they try to keep that on a rotation, so we're not buying 18 sets every time we have to make those purchases. They're also asking it's not on here, but it's in the book on page 26. We need to replace the fire engine. We like to lease equipment that's that expensive, so we'll have lease legislation next year, similar to what's in front of you right now for a medic, for a fire engine. And this is all kind of pushed forward about a year because of the logistics and all of the issues with getting equipment like this built. It's still gonna take them another year or so to actually get it in place. Then we go to the Parks and Rec Department.
So, sorry to ask on that question. So are we already committed if they're already building this?
They are not building the, prove that, then we'll have a board of control and they'll place the order. So it hasn't been ordered yet. And the same thing will work with the fire engine. We will ask council to approve lease legislation, then board of control will approve the purchase, then it'll be ordered.
Okay, so we're not locked into any kind of agreement before that legislation goes through?
No, 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 no.
Thank you.
So the Parks and Rec Department, we have the tree program. This is an annual cost for pruning, removal, and replacement of trees. And then a new item is the parks camera system. You may be aware we put cameras in at City Hall. We put cameras in recently at the pool, and this would do the other finish off the other large parks in the city.
So is that Buck, McKinley, Pierce?
Wyman,
I'm sorry.
yes, those are the four.
So the cameras are for increased security only? Is there anything else?
They're for security.
That's just the hardware cost.
Yes, and they would be, I believe that intent would be, it would be the same system as everything else, and that way it could all be monitored up at the PD. So they would already have most of what they would need in place already.
From an infrastructure standpoint.
Right.
And servicing, storage, et cetera.
Right.
Is there an annual cost for these?
It's the same question I had down, but it's probably a Brian question.
Probably different.
If it is, it's probably minimal, and if we have the infrastructure, we might be storing it in a duplicitous fashion on site. We'll see. I don't think it's gonna rise to any significant cost though.
Okay, then Parks and Rec also has Sidewalk and Hardscape Program. That's the sidewalk project we talked about earlier. Pool siding staining is a new item. If you've driven by, it's not, this pool siding is not in the best shape. It's an expensive endeavor, so we included it in the capital's request. And then the last item is park furniture. We have that in there every year just to improve the benches and the picnic tables that are in all of our parks. The police department is requesting one cruiser. They want to replace cruiser number 2. They need 13 bulletproof vests, and that is the extent of their request. The service department is requesting replacement of ATV number 5, which includes a new dump frame and bucket. Cover for salt storage and food waste enclosure. When there are bins at the service department, they just need to put a cover on it if they're gonna be storing salt in there. And then the food waste enclosure will, or the food waste containers will likely have to move somewhere as well during construction. So this is to come up with some type of enclosure to put it at maybe one of the parks or somewhere around the city to move those.
I thought that we got our salt from Columbus, and that was a benefit of being down on McKinley.
We do get a lot of our brine from Columbus, and we get salt from Franklin County, but we still store a lot of it on site.
Okay.
But we do purchase through them, and we do get some free things from Columbus because we do have that sharing where we plow all the way up to 3rd rather than have them come down one house or whatever. So yeah, we do have some of those agreements. Then the last item is recycling containers. Again, this was a SWACO grant for 2021. Everybody loves it, so we thought we should budget for 2022 to purchase. This is where the residents can come and get a recycling container.
And that will be the blue rolly thing.
Exactly.
How many are there in that?
I think that's 400.
400 or 500.
Oh,
Yeah.
great.
How many have we gotten so far?
This year, I think we got 400.
Yeah, I get confused if it was 4 or 5, but we basically, we had a list of people who wanted them and couldn't get them, so this is to meet that need and then some.
And about 100 a year for the past 2 or 3 years, like, with the grant and everything.
That's a question for Megan.
Yeah, I think we did some the year before as well on the city. I don't remember how many there were. I don't think there were quite 400. And then prior to that, we had done the smaller containers. I
Yeah. So
forget
when we
how-
opened the service building, we could request them, and that was in 2019.
Yeah, so it's been several years that we've been doing it. It's kind of expanded this year, 2021, with the SWACO grant, and it's kind of become the expectation, and we know that there's enough people out there that want them that we thought we should continue at that level. So then we go on to infrastructure. These are items that we do every year that need to be replaced every year. So water valve replacement, storm inlet and catch basin replacement, water line repair and replacement. These are, City of Columbus covers a certain number of water line breaks, and then it's on us. So we put in $18,000 each year to address potential water line breaks that aren't covered by Columbus. Utility access holes, which used to be called manholes, but we were informed by Microsoft that this is the more appropriate description. We thought that was good. And then regulatory and street sign replacement. So the total capital request is $797,000, and that is covered by the funds in Fund 350.
They went with holes, not portals.
I know that would match, maybe next year.
And we inviting Dr. Hu. when that is.
And then the last item I included on the slides are that we will come to you later to ask for funding, but we know that they're out there. Civic Facilities Pre-Construction Services. This was Director Pelker's estimate of what we're gonna need in 2022. We'll likely use money from the general fund to pay for these things because we have that balance out there. But at this time, we don't have a firm number of what that is and what that means, so we'll come back for a supplemental next year when we have a better idea. The Fairview Avenue Infrastructure Project, these are the construction costs, $2.2 million. The project cost will be reduced if we don't get grant funding. So, Mayor, do you want to talk a little bit about the recent updates
Well,
on that?
unfortunately, we learned a few days ago, I inquired with the federal, the congresswoman's office, and those earmarks were taken out of the infrastructure bill. So the answer to, did we get the federal grant? Unfortunately, no. I did go down on Friday downtown to pitch to OPWC, the OPWC application. And that was an interesting process. There are a lot of worthy projects there as well, so we'll have to see. That's gonna have to play out. And then beyond that, we really think it's probably too early to get anything from the infrastructure bill. It's very preliminary as to know what all will be in there that we'll be eligible for. But we have a feel that by the time that becomes clear, this thing needs to be down the road very quickly. No pun intended, because of the school's timeline, because of the project timeline. So we are hoping for OPWC love on this one.
And these would come out of the fund balance? Once these came forward and we had an actual request before us, the consideration would be to take this from the fund balance.
Do you mean
Exactly.
from cash balance?
Yes.
I think so, yeah,
Thank you.
yes.
It'll be rescoped. Other grant opportunities will obviously be reviewed at that time, but worst comes to worst, that's what we're gonna have to do.
Right. Is there anything that we can do to help the OPWC grant application process?
I don't think so. Thank you for offering. This was the first year they allowed for a member of the entity to come and speak. So of course we took that opportunity, but it's really a points a points process. We, obviously, you all know EP Ferris is our city engineer. They've got a grants person with them who is really fantastic. He really understands a lot of different programs and how to pitch yourselves the best, and he had some very good feedback on making this as attractive as possible, and I'm sure he will be really helpful with other opportunities that come forward. So,
You know
thank
what
you.
the timeline for OPWC?
It is, we've got a couple more meetings, but it should be in the next month. I can't remember the exact date.
Then the last item on this list for 2022 is the Goodale Boulevard improvements, which includes the water line. And that's another one where we're just gonna, you know, see what grant funding opportunities. So let's see if there's. Then I can kind of take you through these other tabs. Tab 4 is just showing you, this is where we make sure we're in compliance. This lists out every fund, what we anticipate the revenue to be, what we anticipate the expenses to be, the difference, and then this is how we make sure that we have enough money in every fund to cover all the costs. It's little, there's a lot of information in there, but this is just showing you how we've balanced every fund.
Can you clarify if we once again, put public art funds in the Parks and Rec? Or-
Yes.
Thank you.
Tab 5 lists the revenue by line item for every fund. So if you're really interested, you can look at all of that. Then tab 6 has the general fund, or the appropriation ordinance, and at the very back of tab 6 is a roll-up that many of you have probably seen in the past, where we show by each department. So when we budget for administration, it's a roll-up of several different departments, and this just shows you the breakdown of all of that. Tab 7 shows you all the appropriations by line item. You guys approve it at the function object level. This is kind of going into a little bit more detail. And then tab 8 is the capital ordinance with a 5-year capital plan at the back. We try to get the department heads to kind of think ahead so we can balance out the amount our purchases each year. So we don't have one year that's exceptionally higher than all the others.
Is there anything that's been delayed due to the pandemic, either, like shipping issues or all the random crap that's happening right now?
I would say there's been a couple of vehicles that were approved for the service department and that we've ordered that are, I mean, it's gonna be a year and a half before we get them. The vehicles for the police, for the fire department were in the same situation because of that. Then there's other things the administration would have liked to do, but because of the income tax, we just couldn't, and the department had some great ideas, but we just couldn't take on new
Well,
initiatives.
and I'll speak to a few things that you guys are familiar with. One was the sanitary issue we had out on Pierce, or outside of Pierce on Hilo, the lift station that was put in. Probably more of a labor availability than a supply issue, but that thing sat all summer. And it is, I'm happy to report, done. The ox pit barely got done, but did, and then, well, the air conditioner, luckily, it turned fall, but that was several months. We waited for that. There was a security door that we added, security on the doors at City Hall. That was probably 6 months delayed. So, and I think the big one is, of course, we're looking at the municipal facility planning and anticipating it's going to be a wild ride.
Okay, but you don't see huge changes to your general, future forecasting on what you'll need due to?
No, I think the big, huge ones were really that medic that is before you now and the fire engine. We had to bump those up, just, I mean, they'll still be in place in the time that we originally thought, but that's just because we were gonna be placing the orders earlier.
It's probably a year and a half